Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. We are going to do something a little different. When you hear the voice of Dr. Nick Pitts, you're going to say, it's not Wednesday. Well, he will be sitting in this chair on Wednesday. But a little bit later, we're going to be interviewing Jonathan Haidt. And I knew that Nick wanted to be a part of that. We also have Chip Ingram a little bit later. And so he decided to come in today. So you got a twofer, and it is always great to have you here.
And, you know, I don't know what you did wrong in a previous life, Kerby, to have to put up with me not just once this week, but twice this week. But nevertheless, I am exceedingly grateful to be a part and excited, because I think there's a couple of things we can talk about today.
I would think so. And again, in some respects, you know, it's a little easier on that side of the table than it is on this one, because you have to watch the clock and all those kinds of things. So anyway, Nick Pitts is with us. And let me come to one of the things we talked about yesterday, because you've talked about it in your daily briefing. Again, if you have not subscribed to a daily briefing, which is produced by Mr. Nick Pitts, Dr. Nick Pitts, then I would encourage you to do so. We have that latest issue on our website today, pointofview.net. But yesterday I was quoting a lot from Proverbs 18. You know, the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. And I noticed yesterday you were pointing out something I was pointing out. Sometimes when you see a video or you hear something said, there's a value in waiting, and the situation of what's now been called the Covington affair. That is, these poor kids from Covington, Kentucky, who, as far as we can determine, were just standing around waiting to pick up the bus at Lincoln Memorial, got involved in all of this, and with a clipped video made it look like this young man, we now know his name. His name is Nick Sandman, was looking like and perceived as smirking at and confronting this Native American. And it turns out the story wasn't quite as complex as, or is more complex, I guess, better way to say that, than the way it was portrayed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're beginning to see. So we know snapshots don't really do justice to a complete picture. And so the initial reaction was out of this viral video is, if you only saw this viral video that was a minute and a half, it just looks awful. It just looks like there's a Native American man that is protesting by banging on his drum, and he's surrounded by these high school students that are wearing Make America Great Again hats. It seems very highly politicized, and they're it seems as though they're being very disrespectful towards this individual. Well, when we find more news reports that come out, you see the greater clip of the video, which is around 2 hours long. You start to see a bigger picture, i.e. that there's another group there, the Black Hebrew Israelites, which is just a very much, if you've been in D.C., you know that they're just they're very inappropriate with some of the things that they say, and
right.
just their comments are unbecoming, just to say the very least, with that. And so you know that they were chanting and saying some very derogatory words towards just these students that were waiting around. And then all of a sudden you see the Native American, Mr. Phillips, begin to make his way into the crowd. And so it's not that the boys were surrounded him, but rather he found himself in the midst of the boys. And then we find out more that this isn't the first time that Mr. Phillips has been a part of this. So we're starting in a strange, shocking twist. The 1 minute video clip that shines an awful light on the boys is not the full picture. And because of that now, the reaction has just been It's just been shocking from both sides.
Well, and again, let's just for a minute recognize that when either you or I were in high school, and I have to think a lot further back than you do, and a junior in high school, and somebody comes up to you and you don't know what to do, and so you just sort of, kind of smile, and because you don't know what the next thing is, that was portrayed as a smirk, and now that's supposed to be the image of white supremacy. You know, we got Rick Kavanaugh, and we have poor Nick Sandman here, and this is again just people reading into a situation where I suspect this 17-year-old is going, "What am I supposed to do? I don't want to increase the tension here. I don't want to cause more of a problem." Maybe he should have backed up, but, just because he was wearing the hat didn't make him a bad guy, right?
Yeah, usually when there's somebody that would approach me in high school, I wasn't looking at the person as much as looking for my friend Jason, because my friend Jason was much better, much bigger, and I knew that he would take care of me, because I was about 145 pounds soaking wet, so I was like a granddaddy long leg in high school, which not much has changed. But it does say something about this is, one, you just can't come to quick judgments. We have
right.
I mean, in a shocking twist, the biblical narrative still applies in this situation, that we need to be slow to speak and quick to listen. And it seemed as though, especially online reaction, that many individuals were very quick to speak and slow to listen. And because of that, some insinuations and comparisons were made that just now, as more facts begin to emerge, are just inappropriate to be able to use and just not right. But I think there is the sense that, and I would be interested to hear what our callers have to say about this. I think I don't want us to move too quickly to the other side as well as to be able to portray the boys as angels, because then I think we make the exact same error that the other side has made, in that we are now we're taking another clip, which again, it's a much longer clip, granted, it's about another clip, and we're now beginning to project meaning onto that's going to demonize another side as well. And so I want us to be cautious and just to recognize that clips, video, when you're not there, you don't get the full grasp of what's happened in the situation. You can't hear certain voices. You can't hear certain things. But what we do know right now is some of the initial conclusions that these boys were somehow wrong or inappropriate is not the full story.
Yes. And again, let's just say that for another couple of minutes, because first of all, the other day, my daughter talked me into taking another photography course. And of course, I grew up really enjoying photography, and I had
I didn't know this about you, Kerby.
But, I did a lot of photography when I was young, but I kind of got out of it because now they have those digital cameras and everything. But it was just a reminder taking the course that when I take a picture here, I'm not seeing the picture over here. And so in some respects, people think that when they see it on video, they're seeing the whole scene. And lots of times, some of the action on the sides, unless you have a wide angle lens, you don't see. So that's the first point. Point number two, don't jump to conclusions either way. Although I will, in most cases, grant young people some flexibility, because sometimes in your youth you do some things because your cerebral cortex isn't completely developed, your frontal cortex isn't developed. You say some things, you do some things that maybe later on you wouldn't do as an adult, and so that's another part of it. But again, just don't jump to the other side either. Recognize that probably just any time you see a gathering of individuals that look like they're going to riot or even going to protest, you might want to just stay away from that, because you just don't know what's going to happen next.
And again, I think you bring up a certain nuanced perspective that I think is very helpful. But what's not helpful is, what wasn't initially helpful is when everyone demonized these high school boys.
Sure.
What is not helpful still is now you have the other side that is using the demonization, and to the extent that now they're like, there's a term called doxing on the internet, and doxing is airing all of these, they're children. We'll call it for what it is. They are children underneath the law. These are kids, and they're airing all their parents' information, trying to these locations, and so now the schools have taken added security measures, and so families have began receiving threats, and that's no way that you should be responding to this situation. This is just not the way that we do things here in the U.S., and it's just very problematic and troublesome, not only here in the immediacy of the moment, but also long-term wise. What are we becoming as a nation? I think David Brooks had a really great point that we'll have to talk about at the next break. But David Brooks does highlight a particular issue now that we're really trying to create this moral superiority complex here through technology, which is just very disinhibitive of the conversation that we could be having in the public.
And very dangerous because, reading that, what Nick Sandman's gone through where threats to him and his family and his parents, and we'll come back and talk about that. We have a lot more to cover, including the BuzzFeed story, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, when the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973. Who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Staines Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13, in theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, perhaps you have some thoughts about these young people from Kentucky at Covington. And again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, as we always point out, we broadcast on Facebook Live. You can leave a comment there. And the other day, I think somebody had some problems with one of the internet feeds, and that's why I say you can watch this on pointofview.net. You can listen to it on pointofview.net. You can watch or listen to it at Facebook Live. And, of course, you can also listen to it on your radio. So we've given you multiple ways to hear this today. In case you have any kind of glitch in one of those feeds, we provide multiple feeds. That's a nice service.
Way to go. Way to serve, Point of View. Way to serve.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to our good friend, David Brooks. We need to get him on. Well, I'm glad we got Jonathan Haidt on today, so we'll work on that one, work on the next one. But I think his point's well taken. The technology and the mindset are sort of coming together, hand in glove, to create this sort of moral superiority and this ability to call out people and then, as you mentioned, to dox people, which has happened before in Senate meetings and all sorts of other things. And so as a result, this is really getting out of hand. And I'm not one to call for the limitation of the First Amendment, because people have the freedom to say whatever they want. But I wish we could at least get some manners that are associated with the First Amendment, don't you think?
Yeah, so David Brooks makes a really great point that I think it's important for us to understand in that news organizations, this isn't their I don't want to assume that this is their primary motivation, but news organizations, just like any other business, they're in it, they need to make money. And what he says is, and this is a quote from his article, he says, before you judge the reporters too harshly, it's important to remember that these days the social media tail wags the mainstream media dog. If you want your story to be well placed, and if you want it to be professionally rewarded, you have to generate page views. You have to incite the social media monster, and that's just what's happened now. And so now we're seeing this, and we're not just seeing, but here's the differentiating factor, obviously, is these are young boys that bear the image of God. And these aren't simply just some animals or something along those lines. And we see this in other instances as well, just simply with just the way that they formulate these titles. And Ben Sass touches on this too in his book, Them. Like they're reformatting the titles to be able to use these outlandish terms like destroy, disseminates, taunts, just these absolutely kills, the greatest thing you'll ever see, incredible. They're using these huge words and claims to be able to draw your eyes to this. And so I think there's that component, but like with stories like this, what we continue to see is that it literally, that's their well-being. They're wanting to do this. Now, is it right that they did this? No, there's no world in which this is right that they so quickly condemn these individuals, and praise God that our God's not like that. It's like slow to anger and gracious in general, because we're living in a world today where it's very quick to anger, and not only quick to anger, but quick to speak, to condemn, and to judge.
You know, one of the comments that just came in here is, again, the kids did nothing wrong. I'm not sure about that, but certainly they didn't try to initiate anything, and their lives are in danger now. They're talking about closing the school, talking about the parents who, as he and Nick even said in his little letter that we read yesterday, my parents weren't there, so stop at least attacking my parents.
Yeah.
You know, you shouldn't be attacking me either. I'm a 17-year-old. I didn't pick this fight, and I didn't even do anything other than stand there, but then I got vilified. And when you do have people that don't show any kind of maturity, the mature response would be, this young man looks like maybe he wasn't as respectful as he should be. Not, let's go kill this kid. Let's not go and destroy their lives. And that's the kind of mindset that has already launched itself there in Kentucky. One kid says, I live near you. Another one says, I'm going to come after you. And
it's ridiculous.
There's deranged people that might actually go do that. And then
let's just shift the onus from always talking about these kids right now to what we do know is that Mr. Phillips, the Native American protester, made his way into that crowd. Well, that's very clear of what he's done. The tape very much shows that. Now, granted, there are other pieces of evidence now that are emerging, and this is why I'm so slow right now to cast any judgment on any entity right now, because there's new videos that are coming out that shows this boy that's dancing without his shirt. Like, so again,
I've heard about that.
It's like, and so I don't want to be quick to judge anyone, but what I do know is it's very clear that Mr. Phillips makes his way into the center of all those just Catholic schoolboys that are there for the March for Life. And this is in the school that they're going to. They've even added this piece to the Pledge of Allegiance. To which it stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, born and unborn, has been added to the Pledge of Allegiance that they have. So it's very much they're pro-life people, and they're doing some, but it's I expect more of elder gentlemen. And added on top of that, elder gentlemen that are war veterans. And when the gesture has been made as recently as 12 hours ago, and I can't believe that we're operating so quickly right now, but that's just the new news media cyclone that when the gesture has been made for him to meet with these boys to have some moment of reconciliation, and he's turned down this gesture, that raises questions in my mind as to what harm does it do to meet with these boys and talk out and reconcile one with another. And hopefully we're bigger than this, but it doesn't seem as though I'm questioning now. I have a multitude of questions because of that.
Well, and it sort of reminds me of something else we talked about yesterday, and that is before the president even puts forward his compromise, the Democrats already say it's a non-starter, and we're not meeting with him. Okay, well,
and that's
how do we get anywhere?
And so it's kind of similar to Supreme Court justices, right? So when we're already going to boycott this. I guess it was Neil Gorsuch when he was put forward. We're already going to boycott that. And again, and you can go back and read my record. Like I was very much against when Republicans did this with Merrick Garland, saying we're just going to completely oppose him. Well, who knows? They could be somebody good. Now, granted, we know history and we know the past doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, so we can learn from it. But I just hate that we completely reject out of hand, because I think when we do that, we inhibit the opportunity and we don't allow individuals to be able to surprise us. And so, but again, like I completely understand what's happening. I'm just very frustrated with the kind of the current reality that we find ourselves in right now.
Some of this is a perfect setup for a conversation we'll have a little bit later with Jonathan Haidt about the coddling of the American mind. It has created some of that. But just before we take a break, I did want to get your other comment, because one of the things we've posted here is the BuzzFeed reporters.
Oh, boy.
Now, again, we have two individuals, one that has seen the evidence, supposedly, the other that had not even seen the evidence, which I did not know till I read this article. And again, this was something that came out late Thursday night. Now, you and I both make news judgments. You had to decide, okay, do I put that in the daily briefing? I had to decide, well, we're going to talk about that on Friday. Well, with Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter, we had enough to talk about anyway. And there was something in the back of my mind that said, if this is true, it will have some staying power, and we might even have an impeachment trial because of it. Mm-hmm. But if it's not true, there's no reason to talk about it like everybody else is talking about it. And so by the time we got to the weekend, when you have the Mueller special counsel's office reviewing the evidence to determine if there were any documents or any witness interviews like those described, and said, nope, there were none. And so you think, okay, at this point, I would think the BuzzFeed reporters would say, well, maybe we got it wrong. Oh, no, we're going to stand our ground.
Double down.
Goodness.
Oh, my goodness.
Here we go.
And again, I want to compliment BuzzFeed I want to give honor where honor is due with BuzzFeed. I loved their quizzes. Like, so they're, who's your sitcom dad? What decade should you have been born in? They used to have these fun quizzes on their website, and I'm sure that they still do. And that's great. But what so that's where I agree with BuzzFeed. Where I disagree with BuzzFeed is these I mean, again, I know BuzzFeed has the capacity
kind of reports.
They have the capacity to be able to report. They brought on Ben Smith, who was I think he was at Politico before he came over to BuzzFeed News to really generate and start that. But to make these type of claims in this type of environment, and then to be proven wrong on these claims, or even to a great degree for the special counsel's office to come out and
just
dispute
unprecedented.
It just is very much like to be able to at least own up and say, well, it appears as though my sources, either double down on your sources and say, you've got to give us more information, we've got to be able to see this to be able to make these claims, or to be able to back away and say, we were just wrong. That's when it becomes very problematic. And it appears as though they're just going to continue to double down until it's already overwhelming evidence that they were wrong, until it gets just insurmountable, that then, unfortunately, individuals will have to lose their job because they lack journalistic credibility with some of the pieces that they put out.
I would think so. Those of us a little bit older, since I'm the old guy around the table, remember Woodward Bernstein. One time they made a mistake because they misunderstood something that was communicated by, I don't think it was Deep Throat, but one of their sources. But then they had so many successes that one failure was a blip on the screen, and eventually they turned out to be right. This doesn't look so good for these reporters. And again, if my name is Ben Smith and I'm doing reliable there at BuzzFeed, I'm going, you just kind of sullied the whole organization a little bit.
And then
right?
there's third parties that can come into this. Brian Stelter over at CNN Reliable Sources. He should be one. He had them on his program. He should be an individual that continues to put pressure on them. Because, again, this isn't just one media entity. This is a holistic enterprise that we're talking about here. And when the media is at such a record level low of trust, it's important for them to be able to own up to mistakes.
I would think so. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today around the round table here, and Dr. Nick Pitt's with us, and I might just mention again his daily briefing. We have the latest issue of it on our website, pointofview.net. But in addition to the arguments that we talked about in terms of BuzzFeed, I posted a couple of others. One by David French, been on the program with us before, and always appreciate his. And he talks about this idea of progressive populism, and then also Michael Doherty, which really gets into this whole idea of even the attempts not only to stigmatize the Christians, but the Christian institutions. And a good example of that might be Karen Pence. I mean, the whole argument was that here you have the second lady, the vice president's wife, who before has taught at Emmanuel Christian School. Now, it turns out that I've actually preached at Emmanuel Christian Church and know some of the individuals there. I think it's still the church that Gary Bauer goes to. So I've known the organization there when I was in Falls Church and known that she had taught art there. So the idea is, well, I'll go back and teach art there again. Oh, boy. Here we go. CNN says the language of the school's conduct code is disgusting. Another one said that this was a school that discriminated against LGBT adults and children. One commentator said it's like a real-life setting for The Handmaid's Tale. I think some of that's a little over the top.
Man,
what are your thoughts?
Well, Kerby, I'm sorry. I need to leave. I didn't realize that you were associated with such a hateful organization like a church.
I see in my face these faces of these really sweet people that serve all the time and are just gracious individuals. And really, some of them are political because a few people that work for the CIA and the government go there, but mostly there's just general loving folks.
Yeah.
And yet, look how they've been vilified.
Well, I think so. Again, this is me wanting to think the best of the other side, and so I'm discouraged by some of the comments that have been made about Miss Pence wanting to go back and teach, and then just the whole idea. Like I'll disagree with certain individuals that would say that there's just a complete antagonism towards. So I know there's one CNN reporter that I know that kind of was a part of one of the stories, and there was a certain commentator that I won't mention that said that this person obviously hates Christians, and I knew that she actually was a Christian, and so I thought that was kind of ironic. But what I will say is that they just largely don't know; they're not familiar with Christians. Statistically, we just need to understand that there's less Christians per people per capita than there is down here in the South, and that's just a reality. And so that we fear or we hate that which we don't know all too often. And so there's that piece. And then the frustrating piece is just and again, this probably goes back to a larger issue where you just have certain individuals that have now decided that even though they're Christians, that have become accepting of certain LGBTQI beliefs in the biblical narrative, which are just, I would argue, are not in the biblical narrative. The Bible very clearly identifies those as a form or manner of life that is we've been called to crucify in order that we could live a life guided by the Spirit of God that calls us to a higher standard. And so when you hear about the Lady Gagas are saying that he's the worst Christian, Vice President Pence is the worst Christian of all. Because
and you wrote about that today in the daily briefing.
Yeah, and so that's just that's very troublesome. Just because Mike Pence is, I would consider him an individual that has just gone above and beyond to be without reproach, and
very nice man.
Yeah,
if you've ever been with him, you got to like these individuals, not hate these individuals.
And you might disagree with them politically, but from a biblical perspective, it's hard. Like this is the same God that again, because Lady Gaga claims to be a Christian, the same God that both Lady Gaga and Mike Pence worship is also the same God. It says in Isaiah 1:18 to come and let us reason together, and it doesn't seem very reasonable for Lady Gaga to use that kind of vitriolic and bombastic language if they're really inhibiting any type of chance to reason together. So,
one of the commentaries I have next week coming out, if I can quote myself for just a minute, is that I don't think Karen Pence is really the target. She's kind of the collateral damage of the target. The target are other Christian schools, universities, and seminaries. And that's is kind of the argument there that Michael Doherty's saying, because, you are at, for example, let's just use an example, Dallas Baptist University. Yeah. I've taught in the past at places like Dallas Theological Seminary. I've looked at their code of conduct, which isn't that different than some of these others. And so this is just sort of this problematic, to use the word of the day, problem that is surfacing. And that is that we are now having individuals say that if you don't hone to the view of the politically correct LGBT agenda, then now it's down to Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
It's, they're good people and bad people, and you're just bad people.
Yeah.
And there's no graciousness that I need to extend to you or to the institution that holds to those views.
Yeah, and it's troublesome, one, because these are not radically new views. Like these have been around for centuries. Like even before the biblical narrative, some of the things that we've held to be true have been around even before the biblical narrative was penned. This idea of faithfulness, this idea of chastity, and I think, especially from the Christian perspective, I think it's easy for us, one, just to identify, well, these are things that we just believe, and then we just need to come to it. I think it's going to be important moving forward for us to craft better language that helps us to understand it's not just homosexuality that we're picking on, that we're really for the purity of the entirety of the body. And so, we can talk about the 2 to 4% of Americans that are practicing homosexuals, or we can also need to talk about, if we're talking about purity, we need to talk about the 60 to 80% of individuals that are watching pornography on a regular basis. And so that's just as much a sexual sin as homosexuality. Now, that probably makes a significant number of people uncomfortable right now, but that's typically what the Spirit of God does. And so it's important for us to talk about some of these issues and to begin to think through, it's not that we hate gay people, but rather it's because we love gay people, and we believe it to be true that following the biblical narrative leads to the fullness of life, and we want everyone to be able to experience that fullness of life and the completion of joy that comes with following after the giver of life, which is Jesus.
And we need to figure out a way, if I can paraphrase you, to communicate it more effectively. I remember a while back I sent you something. It was about how most millennials believe in socialism, not capitalism. And your comment back was, we need to do a better job of explaining capitalism. Well, let me change that to here. Given the fact that most people don't really understand what Christianity is, and even why there are moral ideas in the Bible, we really have to do a better job of explaining that. And we used to have more and more people in the press contact us. But with the advent of social media, something we just talked about, I can't even remember the last time I had somebody call me up to get an opinion on an issue, when it used to happen all the time. So they get their opinions off of social media, so they are even more isolated from us before. Well, it was bad back in the 1970s. I remember when Jimmy Carter ran, and some reporters said, I just found out that the term born again is in the Bible. And I remember one time Cal Thomas telling me a story that somebody came in and said, are you an evangelical? And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you know. He said, well, I know, but I don't know if you know.
Exactly. I think that's a great point.
And so in some respects, we can't expect people that have never been to church, never read the Bible, and don't know Christians. And we've learned that from the Lichter Rothman report, that they don't go to church or synagogue. They don't know people that go to church or synagogue. You almost have to educate them like they're from a foreign country.
There used to be a day, and I've made this point before, there used to be a day that individuals would ask these type of questions. And so there was an emphasis upon then Christians to be able to provide answers. Well, now that day is not here. Now we have individuals that think they have the right answers, but in reality, they have answers that I would argue are a couple of deviations off from correct. They're just wrong, if I wanted to be just completely blunt. And so because of that, then I can't just give them answers. I've got to be able to stir something inside of them to create what's known as cognitive dissonance. And one of the primary ways that you create cognitive dissonance is by asking questions. And so it's less us trying to provide answers, and it's more us poking at the questions, the preconceived notions they already have. And that's the beautiful thing about what Jesus did. You read the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is writing his gospel message to Jews, and when he's writing his gospel message to Jews, you're hearing him say, you have heard it said, and I say unto you, you have heard it said, and I say unto you. You find Jesus repeatedly throughout Matthew asking these pertinent questions to be able to create this cognitive dissonance, such as it is today. We have to create cognitive dissonance because individuals just largely have these ruts that they're thinking in that think that we think one thing, but in reality, we don't.
And so if I can use your biblical illustration, let's go to the book of Acts. And when Paul is in Acts 13 in a synagogue, he can assume they know a lot of things. But when Paul is in Athens, and I've actually stood most likely where he stood and seen the Areopagus and seen Mars Hill and all of that, I realize they don't know anything. And the world that we live in is more of an Acts 17 culture and less of an Acts 13 culture, which, if you notice, Paul backs up rather significantly and, in a sense, makes an argument for the existence of God, because he's dealing with a people that don't know the Bible, don't know who Jesus is, and believe in a pantheon of gods. That's the world we live in today.
Exactly.
Well, again, when Nick Pitts agrees, we got to go to a break. So we'll come back. I want to pick up one more other issue, and this one is a tougher one, and that is the one of the other things in the article is about these religious test questions. Mm-hmm. Is there ever a place where we can ask people about their religion? Of course. What's appropriate, what's not? We'll discuss that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1997, the Birdville Independent School District welcomed 2 students to their meetings. One student led the Pledge of Allegiance, while the other student delivered a statement of his own choosing, according to the school's policy of allowing student remarks. And that continued for years, most often in the form of an invocation during which the board members stood respectfully quiet with bowed head while the student prayed. That was all well and good until a humanist group sued, alleging the school boards are not legislative bodies and should not be permitted to have an invocation in the same way a state legislature, city council, or county commission does. Eventually, the case arrived before the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where a 3-judge panel upheld the practice, stating, quote, legislative prayers are recited for the benefit of legislative officers. It would be nonsensical to permit legislative prayers but bar the legislative officers for whom they are being primarily recited from participating in the prayers in any way, unquote. The fact that students undertook to lead those invocations was of minimal concern. Quote, although it is possible to imagine a school board student expression practice that offends the Establishment Clause, the court explained, this one, under its specific facts, does not, unquote. This is a routine area of challenge by secularists, but one with limited success, since the long tradition of our country is one of support for prayer at public meetings. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that Chip Ingram will be with us, and we'll be talking about his new book, Marriage That Works, which, by the way, is a series. There's DVDs that go with it and a number of other things, and I just, of course, have had such a great appreciation for him over the years. But I thought, while we have Nick Pitts here for a little bit longer, and you're going to be joining us for these interviews.
Do you want me to give any marriage tips for
yes
for individuals out there? That might be, for those of you who don't know, I am am not married, so I feel like I could probably just write the book on marriage.
Yeah, you
8
could.
Steps to the Perfect Marriage. Yeah.
And it would be really easy. Now, again, you're free to walk away for a while because I know you want to be here for Jonathan Haidt, but really there's a whole section here on is there a man in the house and then the evolution of the American male.
Okay.
Then is there a woman in the house and the evolution of the American woman. And so I think you're really going to appreciate that because it's really back to some of our conversation. So,
Okay.
yes, we will talk, and the two married guys will talk about it.
I like it.
But there will be a lot of things that
Okay.
where your input and ideas will be absolutely essential. And then I'm going to step back and let you and Jonathan Haidt next hour just go at it, and I'll just try to organize it and get us in and out of the breaks.
You
'cause,
never have to worry about me not speaking up. I think that I have never been one to be fearful of asking a question, largely because I am what they call dumb.
no,
So
you
I
are-
just ask a ton of questions.
I always say about you, inquiring minds want to know, and you do have a lot of questions. And Jonathan Haidt, it's an excellent book. I really do recommend it for everybody, The Coddling of the American Mind. We've quoted it here. It's about time we have him on, so while we're quoting him, he can say, that's right, or yeah, well, it's not quite that way, or whatever. I think you're going to appreciate that. But we have posted a couple of articles. The anti-Christian ideology attempts to stigmatize Christian institutions. So whether we're looking at David French or Michael Dougherty, they all came back to something we've talked about before, but I've never gotten your perspective, and that is, when is a, quote, religious question appropriate? Now, we know that Article 6 of the Constitution says we should not have a religious test. And I think most people felt that when Senator Dianne Feinstein was so critical of an individual that became Circuit Court Judge Amy Coney Barrett, that she said your dogma lives loudly within you and a variety of other things, people thought that was inappropriate. But at the same time, are there some times when questions are appropriate or inappropriate? Let me take one more example. Ben Sass the other day introduced a sense of the Senate resolution condemning the idea of asking whether or not membership of the Knights of Columbus was a prohibition against religious tests because Senator Mazie Hirono asked about that in Hawaii. But sometimes I think questions about religion are appropriate. So how can we kind of sort that out? What is a violation of the Constitution at Article 6 and what seems appropriate?
Yeah, and that's a great question about questions, just because, again, I'm not, and my mind can be changed very easily on this, especially if I'm around an individual that's much more experienced than I am on this and has a greater expertise. But to a certain degree, I almost think that really the outworking of your religion reflects your character, and character is just one of those things that you want to be, for any job interview, you want to be at least inquiring about. So I think about some of the boards that I serve on. I think about some of my extracurricular activities. I even think about some of my reading that I do. I know that's a large part of it. It's religious in nature. And so if I can't have any type of question that's asked about me pertaining to religion, that's going to very much limit, especially just because I believe that outworking my religion isn't just simply what I do on Sunday mornings or what I do on certain nights. It really is encompassing of my whole life. There's a reason why I will later on today go to the gym. There's a reason why today I will give some time to be able to work really hard during the day. There's a reason why today, I will go and start reading later tonight. And it's largely motivated by just being compelled to do this out of a religious kind of piece. And so
I would say so.
But then again, I might be trying to strain a gnat to a certain degree. But I would be open to the idea of being able to ask certain religious questions. Now, obviously, there's certain questions that I think are inappropriate, but I think I would have to have examples before I kind of ruled hard and heavy on any particular issue.
You know, what I would say is that there was, and I've used this off the air, so let me use it on the air in my commentary. There was a question that was asked of one nominee about whether or not he worked with his parish to establish a crisis pregnancy center. Well, that's religiously motivated, but okay, that kind of tells you a little bit about where they stand on the life issue, obviously. And again, when they ask at one point, which I thought was so funny, of this nominee to the district court, were you aware that the Knights of Columbus actually have a stand on abortion? Well, duh, yes.
And do you know that the Pope is Catholic?
and I think part of the problem, Nick, is that there are, we use mostly Catholic examples here, although I can give you some from evangelicals as well. The classic one is Bernie Sanders asking a nominee who was a graduate of Wheaton College, going to the Office of Management and Budget about something he wrote about Islam. But let's use the Catholics for just a minute. Most of the Supreme Court justices are Catholic. Some of them believe Catholic doctrine, and some of them do not. And right now, the Democrats seem to suggest that if you're Catholic, that's fine as long as you don't believe it.
Yeah.
But the moment you believe something that the Catholic Church says, well, then that's a deal breaker, and that's where I think I have the difficulty.
Yeah,
right?
it goes back to that the delineation between the freedom of worship and the freedom of religion, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you are free to go on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. wherever you so choose, just as long as it doesn't spill out of that 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning. The ability, or I guess I don't want to say the ability, the capacity for an individual to not allow their religion to outwork and the other 100 plus hours of the week is what we would consider to be a freedom of worship, having an ability to go someplace at a certain time, at a certain place designated for you to go worship there. Well, the freedom of religion, if Kelly was sitting right there, it's much more expansive in nature. It's the understanding that that religion has it changes the way that I do business. Like for a baker, it changes the way that I interact with people. It changes the way that I even do my work to a large degree. And so I would argue that our framers and the founders would argue for the freedom of religion, whereas the freedom of worship is just very narrow in its understanding. And I think it really inhibits us from making a more perfect union, one might be able to say, because we know that religion produces virtue. Virtue is a good ally to a limited government.
And again, one of the reasons I'm bringing this up, first of all, it's in the articles. Both of the articles mention it, but I suspect it's coming again. If indeed Ruth Bader Ginsburg someday has to step down, I think the logical nominee is somebody just mentioned, Amy Coney Barrett. And they're not going to charge her with sexual harassment, I don't think.
No.
So they're going to be looking for something to try to knock her off. And one of those is, well, she's just too Catholic because she's taught at Notre Dame and she believes dogma that lives loudly within her. Yeah. And in some respects, at least I appreciate the honesty. It used to be in the past, they didn't like the way a person stood on pro-life issues or whatever it might be, or same-sex marriage, but they tried to find some other ways around it. Now, at least it's more honest, and that is, you believe what the Bible has to say, and that should be enough to disqualify you from serving in the federal judiciary.
And it's so sad that we're having to have this conversation. This weekend I went to go see On the Basis of Sex, which is the Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of her outworking of kind of equality. And so it was a very good movie. But at the very end, and I'm not ruining the movie for anyone, at the very end, the last slide that was produced was her getting confirmed to the Supreme Court. And they said she was confirmed 96-3. Well, understanding that, and I think it was 1993 that she was confirmed under President Clinton, that was a very different time than what we find ourselves in. And you could tell that the way they presented it, they wanted to make it a stinging indictment on the Gorsuches of the world. They wanted to make it a stinging indictment on, why am I slipping his name right now? Our latest Supreme Court justice that just got confirmed.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Brett Kavanaugh,
Sure.
yes, the
That's
Kavanaugh
fine.
hearings.
Yeah.
And it was like this person, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was so much more unanimously approved, when in reality it's just a very different
so
environment.
Stephen Breyer, so was Elena Kagan. It's because the Republicans vote for the Democrats. The Democrats never vote for the Republican nominee.
It's a very interesting world that we're living in right now.
I think so. What a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive.
I have heard Nick Fitz say that more than once. When we come back, we're going to talk to our good friend Chip Ingram, Marriage That Works. And for those of you that cannot hear the third hour, I encourage you to get on the line, because this interview with Jonathan Haidt about the coddling of the American mind is something we're looking forward to. That'll happen at 2 o'clock. And we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking about two different books today, and I think you're really going to appreciate that. First of all, we'll be talking with our good friend Chip Ingram about this book, Marriage That Works, and also this great material that's available through Living on the Edge, so that you can not only learn about this by reading the book, but watching the videos. And then we're going to, in the next hour, have Jonathan Haidt with us as we talk about the coddling of the American mind. And that's one of the reasons why this is a little unusual, because usually, Nick Pitts, you're sitting in this chair on Wednesday doing the Millennial Roundtable, but instead you're joining us because I know you're looking forward to the interview with Jonathan Haidt.
I thought you wanted my insights on marriage.
Well,
I mean, I've got 0 years of experience in marriage. I bring a swath of treasure trove of goodness to the marriage conversation.
And again, if people are not aware, Dr. Nick Pitts is single, although not for a lack of your parents trying to hook you up. I'm
That's
sure
the
of
truth.
that. But actually, I think keeping you here this hour will be a lot of fun, because there are chapters in here in this book on the evolution of the American man and the evolution of the American woman, in addition to some of the marriage ideas. So I think, first of all, I think you're going to enjoy that. And someday I think maybe you will be married, so you can apply those principles as well.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to it.
And more than, if nothing else, you can tell us how easy it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is what we're going to find out is just the opposite, because we bring Chip Ingram to the conversation. Individual, of course, is a teaching pastor of Living on the Edge, an individual that we've had on this program many times before. He served as not only a pastor of a number of churches, but also as the president for a while of Walk Through the Bible. Master's degree from West Virginia University, a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary. We've talked about some of his books like The Real God, Culture Shock, The Real Heaven, and most importantly, Marriage That Works. Chip Ingram, always great to have you in the program with us.
Thanks, Kerby. It's great to be with you all.
You know, one of the things that I appreciate about you is the fact that you are very vulnerable and honest about the time that you and Teresa have gone together, and some of the struggles that you've had. And Nick, I was just thinking about the fact that sometimes the person that you want to teach leadership, which is what you got your doctorate in, is maybe somebody who's not a natural-born leader because they just take it for granted, but somebody had to learn it. I know in basketball, I learned more from coaches that weren't natural athletes because they had to learn it, rather than a person that was just a gifted athlete. And in some respects, Chip, that's you, because you are very honest in the first part of this book, saying that when you and Teresa got together, you both came from difficult, dare I even use the word dysfunctional families. So you really had to work at and learn some of these biblical principles in ways that maybe others might never have had to really dig deeply into God's Word and begin to apply.
Yeah, both of our fathers were, to varying degrees, alcoholics, but my father was a pretty functioning alcoholic until, I was in high school, and then he went through some more difficult times, and by God's grace came to faith, and, it's a great ending to that story. But we really did not have a model. Neither of us grew up ever reading the Bible. Both came to Christ in very early adulthood.
Right.
And gosh, it was like we didn't know how to communicate. We didn't know how to resolve conflict. But even the basic design, it was just, you love each other. Isn't it supposed to work? And is it supposed to be this hard? And why? And so, yeah, we really struggled. The one thing I think both of us had a radical commitment to the Lord and said, no matter what, we have to figure this out. Divorce is not an option. despite feeling like at times, wow, I don't know how much more I can take. How can I love someone this much and they make me this crazy? And it makes me feel crazy.
Well, and again, one of the things you talk about early on is to have that clear picture of God's design. We find that in Ephesians 5, but that brings us to this idea of mutual submission. And in our society today, where everybody says, I've got to be my authentic self, and I shouldn't give in, and there are good people and bad people, and maybe I just married a bad person, you really have to kind of work your way through what God's design for marriage is, don't you?
I mean, it's really, really interesting. Some of the most provocative teaching in Scripture is there, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to the end of the chapter. And, you know, husband, loves your wives the way Christ loved the church. Wives, the big S word, submit to your husbands. And, you know, there's very clear roles and responsibilities, but I think we often forget the context is being filled with the Holy Spirit and these people's lives that are radically different. And so verse 21 is submit yourselves both to the Lord. And I think it's this picture of God as the choreographer and marriage is a dance. And I think we've got a whole generation and a culture that's arguing about who ought to take the first step rather than, am I willing to submit to the one who has designed this? And there is no inferiority, superiority, but there is really, I mean, someone has to take the first step, and there's got to be a design. And so I think the thing that really makes marriage work, and this is what we had going for us, we both, because of our background, said, I don't know what it looks like, but whatever God tells me to do, I really want to do that. As imperfectly and as hard as it might be, we will do that. And this celebrated 40 years, and I have to say it's been better and richer and deeper and way harder than I ever imagined.
Well, and a lot of this is back to something we've talked about with Nick. Matter of fact, he hosts the Millennial Roundtable tomorrow. And we talk about the fact that a lot of individuals growing up maybe say they know a little bit about the Bible, but they really don't know God's blueprint. And your goal, as I understand it, is something that you're trying to communicate through not only the book, but the series, is as you grow closer together to the Lord, you grow closer together in a marriage. So having a level of biblical literacy and an understanding of God's design is absolutely key to being successful.
It really is, and I think in a day when, I don't say this harshly, but I've been doing this for a while, and I've been doing this in a lot of different places, but especially, you know, here on the West Coast. And what breaks my heart is the average Christian is not in the Scriptures, and the average Christian somehow has turned the Christian life into being moral and trying hard and maybe going to a few services, and yet the design is in Scripture. And, you know, I had this picture that was helpful to me of an equilateral triangle with God at the top, he's the designer, and the man at the bottom of one of the triangle and the woman at the other. And you know, if you just take your fingers and move both fingers simultaneously up toward the top, they keep getting closer and closer together. And at the bottom of that triangle, God's design is for oneness or for intimacy. Intimacy at the spiritual level, the soul level, the bodily level. And that's where the subtitle came from, is God's design is that you would literally be, you know, soulmates, that you would be best friends, and you'd be passionate lovers. And none of that changes in decade 1, 2, 3, or beyond. And it's rich and deep and wonderful, but you do have to follow the design.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Chip Ingram. And again, we have a link to Living on the Edge, and this is not only a book, but a series of resources that is available. And when we come back, Nick, I thought we'd talk a little bit about this idea of the evolution of the American man, the evolution of the American woman. These are conversations we have all the time, and to try to put that in some of the context, because we're getting false messages from the culture. So it's going to be a great opportunity to talk about marriage, but also what's been going on in our culture.
Yeah, it will be. I'm really looking forward to being able to hear your thoughts, Chip, on what does it look like to be a man in today's world? What does it look like to be a woman in today's world as well?
You know, some of the psychiatrists have a different view, don't they? You just wrote about that in the Daily Briefing. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. When the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973, who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scars slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Staines Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13, in theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Chip Ingram as we talk about his new book, Marriage That Works, God's Way of Becoming Spiritual Soulmates, Best Friends, and Passionate Lovers. Dr. Nick Pitt's with us as well. And Nick, you know, there's a chapter here on Is There a Man in the House, a chapter on the evolution of the American man. And this, I think, is one of the great challenges for men today. On one hand, we've been talking about toxic masculinity. We've had various individuals in men's movements say, well, here's what a view of man is. The culture sends a different kind of view. I think it's kind of becoming more and more confusing to even figure out what a man is, especially even with the latest Gillette commercial, right?
Oh, my goodness, yeah. I'll be really interested to hear Chip's comments on this. One of the things, it seems as though I've always operated under the basic assumption that men bring order to chaos. I think that's always been kind of, and I might be wrong on that. But one of the things that it seems as though, especially in the culture now, is it's adding chaos to it with the redefinition of what a man is, and then in this toxic masculinity culture, what does it even mean to be a man? Yeah. Which I think is just a voice is needed, but specifically a Christian voice is needed to help raise boys to become men instead of just having grown boys that can shave.
Well, if nothing else, Chip, let's go back to the owner's manual. What does the Bible have to say about what men and masculinity really look like?
Well, I think it's actually helpful to look at how we got to where we are, because the Bible's really clear that a man, I agree with you, he leads, but he leads sensitively, and he leads as a servant leader. Mm-hmm. I'm called to lead my family the way Christ leads the church, sacrificially, sensitively, with high intentionality, but with the real responsibility at the end of the day, I'm responsible. It's so interesting. So much of the debates are all around different people's rights, And I think the Scripture talks much more about who's responsible for what. And, I did a fun thing where I just took decade by decade TV shows. So you've got Father Knows Best.
Yes.
Most people, or Leave It to Beaver. And, it's a mom and dad and a probably idealistic picture. But, if a tough talk with with the boys, the father does it, the provider, the protector of the family. And then Dick Van Dyke, it moves a little bit there in the early 60s, and we picture them in these separate beds even. And, it's kind of ironic now when you think about where we're at. And then the Brady Bunch comes, and now we have not only a blended family, but really it just gets a bit confusing. And then with Laughter, late 70s, Three's Company, where the introduction of someone who says he's homosexual so he can live with his girlfriend. And then, you go to Murphy Brown in the height of the feministic movement. And then Friends, where, there's all kind of different ways. Who's to say what a relationship looks like, male or female? And then Homer Simpson, every dad is a doofus. And then to Modern Family, where, you just make up what works for you, and that's where we find ourselves today. And, I know you guys are at the philosophical and the issues about truth, but I don't think people realize that, sort of the view of the post-World War II man of seeing the tragedy that's happened in the world, and I want a better life for my family. I'm responsible to provide, and I'm going to protect my family. Now, most of those World War II guys really struggled with the sensitivity and vulnerability. But I think as you look at what happened with the feminist movement and then the no-fault divorce and then the Vietnam War, make love, not war, what we did is we separated responsibility from marriage, and we separated love and sex. And so now we have, it's very interesting, and my heart goes out to, the young guys that I'm mentoring here is, they can be Christians and really love God, but the average man, his wife, feels a load that she can't carry, and basically he knows more about fantasy football, wearing his hat backwards, and I need to provide some money, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. As one young guy, very intelligent, very successful in business, about 38, he just looked at me and goes, you know what, I know I love God. My marriage just isn't working, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. No matter what I do, it's either not enough, but if he doesn't know his role and his wife doesn't know his role, really trying hard in a world of confusion produces just a lot of frustration.
One of the things I appreciate about your books, and even this one in particular, is you have a lot of sort of rubber meets the road, shoe leather kind of practical stuff. And you have, for example, 5 diagnostic questions, and just say, okay, who's dealing with some of those things? Who's initiating spiritual growth, and who disciplines the kids, and who initiates talking about problems and those kinds of things. So sometimes people say, I can't quite get my head around all the things I need to do, but you give us at least some action points to get started down the road in the right direction, don't you?
I do, and maybe to a fault, but this, in some ways, this book is a bit prophetic in there's all this noise, and I'm certainly no huge, big authority, but okay, in the world that we're living in, since relationships aren't working, right? Divorce is paramount. 1 out of 4 kids live with a mom and dad in the same home. A third of all the women that go through divorce will live in poverty. We know that absent father homes that happens through divorce is the highest predictor of every major ill that we have, from incarceration to poverty to violence to all the rest. So what we know is the family structure is not working. I just wanted to say, wait a second. We have totally rejected, this is what God says it is. Now, you can agree or disagree, but then the second half was practically, for those of us that didn't grow up with a dad that knew God, loved God, modeled this, what's it look like to lead your family? What's it look like to provide financially? What's it look like when you have a disagreement? What's it look like to resolve anger? I felt like I just needed to, part of the vulnerability was I struggled a lot. I just meet everybody else is too. But you got to give people some very practical ways to work through that. And I jokingly tell people all that money I had to pay on counseling, they get for free.
And again, yeah, where you live is helpful. We, of course, have people that listen all over the country, but let's just talk to our listeners in California for just a minute. I was born in Berkeley. I remember when I was speaking at San Jose State University, all these feminists were very critical. But my answer, it probably won't be as articulate as I'm going to give it right now, was sometimes you're rejecting these ideas of a biblical idea of marriage, not because you've tried it and found it failing, but because you didn't know it existed or didn't try it in the first case. And when you have individuals that are hurt, they've had divorce, dysfunction, absent fathers, and all the rest, and then you start talking about what the ideal marriage should be, oftentimes they reject it without realizing that that's the nurturing environment that would have created a lot less pain in their life that they're now acting out towards you.
Yeah, and what I want people to hear is I'm not down on or angry with or trying to win a war about anything. What I really want people to know is it breaks God's heart. It breaks God's heart when, the first marriage didn't work, that you've got conflict in this one. And when you tell, I was sitting on the plane with a young, probably 32, 33-year-old gal, super smart, corporate job, and she's looking at me. She recently got married, and she goes, I just don't know what to do. We ended up in a long conversation. I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, I've spent all this time getting to where I am, and now I'm married, and gosh, if I don't have kids in the next few years, but I really want to have kids, and she said, I don't know what it means to be a woman anymore. I've spent all my life, climbing this, and I'm supposed to be that, but I have these internal urges that are so strong. I really want to be a mother, but if I have a baby, then, gosh, we live where we need both incomes and the kind of level that we live. And it was this cry of, something, I think I ended up really successful doing everything this whole world has told me, and it's fighting against some of the most basic core things, and I don't know what to do. And, I'd say to so many women, you got liberated, but what you got liberated in, because it didn't play out. Actually, women, now you have two jobs. You work full-time, and no matter what you say, unless you have a very unusual husband, you do a lot more of the housework and a lot more of the cooking than he does. When there's the decision about where the kids are going to school, who manages the social calendar, what are we going to do? I will say when most couples sit down, they're Christian couples, and when both of you are at home, who disciplines the kids? Who manages the finances? When we have a big decision to make, and I will just tell you, by and large, the woman gets all of that weight, and it's crushing. And I ask women often, what would it feel like to you, if not in some abrasive way, but if your husband, if you felt protected and cherished,
yes,
and he was saying things like, honey, we have some big decisions to make. I really want to get your thinking because our kids really matter. By the way, I'll take care of the homework with you tonight.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation right after this.
Question, do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Chip Ingram as we talk about his book, Marriage That Works, God's Way of Becoming Spiritual Soulmates, Best Friends, and Passionate Lovers. Nick Pitt's with us as well. And you were mentioning something which I thought was so powerful, because here you are, Chip, on an airplane talking to this woman, and I loved what she said. There are so many voices in my head, I just don't know what to do. And we know what those voices are. There's the voices from people that maybe have had a traditional marriage in the church saying, you need to be at home with your kids. There are people out there in the culture that are saying, no, you're a woman and you have got this graduate degree and you need to pursue your career. And I think it is more difficult to be a woman in the 21st century than it was, say, maybe in the 19th or even the early part of the 20th century, because there's just this cacophony of voices in their heads, isn't there?
I couldn't agree more. And I think the thing that is so sad is, and we live in a culture. I'm hopefully I'm not causing any problems by this comment, but it's America, and people can live and believe and do whatever they want to do. It's an amazing country. I'm speaking to people in the church, followers of Christ, and I don't think we're to tell the rest of the world how they're supposed to live and what they need to do. My heart breaks when what I see happening is I think God's people are listening more to the outside voices than Him, and what we see is such pain, such difficulty, such dysfunction, and women who feel like I have an impossible job. And often a husband who's well-meaning, who basically is riding in the passenger seat these days and waiting for his wife to tell him what to do while she's desperately waiting for to strongly and sensitively nurture and lead and care. But what I will say before, it's easy to bash a bunch of men. I didn't know what that looked like. I had no idea how to lead. Be the spiritual leader of your family. You might as well tell me to, get a rocket on the moon, or you're supposed to be the wise steward of your finances, or you're supposed to discipline your kids. All of that to me was like, are you kidding? My mom did all that in our home. I mean, my dad was a good guy. He was a great athlete and was a great teacher, but he didn't do any of that. So I kind of started from scratch and just said, God, if you'll show me. And then, we worked at it, but I would just say, Kerby, my heart breaks for people inside the church, and I think it takes a lot of courage to say we're actually going to live our life and our marriage according to the Scripture, despite all the voices that we hear.
One of the things that you include in this, and then we'll move on to stepping up as a man and stepping up as a woman, is what you call Teresa's 3 truths. First, I feel secure because I trust Chip to be having my best interest in mind. Second, I love the Lord in His Word. And third is clear communication. Sometimes the difficulty for the man in the home is, honey, what do you want out of me? And I thought it was really powerful that she kind of talked about some of the things that she was looking for in your marriage, and I suspect most women are looking for in their marriage.
One of the things I say, Teresa and I have done a lot of marriage conferences in the past, and it's easy for people to see all the holes and get so discouraged, and I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that. I said, here's a little exercise. I want you to jot down just on a little card the top 3 things that your wife does, and just be honest, that really make you feel loved, make you feel like a man, make you want to lead. Just the top 3 things that she does. And then, ladies, I want you to jot down the top 3 things that if he would do these, man, do I feel loved and empowered and encouraged. And rather than focus on all the negatives, you can go on forever. And then I have them exchange cards. And then I just say, okay, this week, here, this is, you know what? You don't have to solve problems. This week, you now know for sure 3 things that will really communicate to your wife. And for most guys, it's like, she thinks this is love? So without asking, I'm going to help around the house, empty the garbage, and help with the kids' homework. What? Okay, get that vacuum out. In other words, after dinner, I'm going to sit down, send the kids to various places, and for 20 minutes just say, tell me how you're really doing. I don't want to fix anything. I want to hear what's on your heart. You know, a guy starts doing that, it's amazing what happens, because that's what really communicates love to her. Or, you know, what are the big decisions or things that are coming up? Can we get the calendars out together and you take the initiative? And the flip side is, you know, when a woman goes, he wants me to say respectful and encouraging things and not nag him. He wants me to show my affection physically in ways that make him feel like a man. Oh, I mean, gosh, all I wanted to do is fix the faucet, you know? And all of a sudden, what you realize is so much of this is not rocket science, but you build on the fact of the matter is you love God, you love one another, and so you can take some early first steps. And what I found was it's really encouraging. If you really want to love your mate, ask them what that looks like, and it's amazing. That's a good first step.
One of the things you do in your book is you have a whole set of sections, 3 chapters on stepping up as a man, provide, protect, and nurture. And then a little bit later, we'll get stepping in as a woman, nurture, protect, and provide. But again, these are a lot of practical helps, but if nothing else, this gets us back into some of the basic needs. And if a man thinks about what he needs and assumes that's the same thing that a woman needs, he's going to be making a big mistake, because sometimes what she needs is very different than what he needs. True?
Oh, just, you know, I wish I didn't have to laugh so much about that just in my own life. But, well, you know, if I wanted to simplify the whole book, here's what the book is. Once we get this is God's design, I just try to answer 2 questions per man. Who are you to become, and what are you to do? In other words, what's your role? Who are you to be? And then what are you to do? And then for a woman, who are you to become? And what are you to do? And as basic as that sounds, and then not Chip Ingram's perspective of that, just what does the Bible say for sure? And then there's tons of room inside of personalities and backgrounds and family of origins to, you know, figure those things out in a way that really fits for you. But I think it's really clear, the Bible's really clear, you know, as was shared earlier, is that a man is to provide and protect and nurture his family. So I need to be the spiritual leader. I need to provide spiritually, just like a priest's job was to, you know, take the people's needs before God and take God's instruction to the people. And for most of us men, you know, even praying with our wives was at least hard for me. But learning to become the spiritual provider, being the financial provider, doesn't mean that, you know, you both can't work or this or that. But at the end of the day, it's really different to say, I own the responsibility that we have food on the table, clothes, and you know, a roof over our head. And, you know, in different seasons that might look different, but I'm responsible for that. I'm going to provide spiritual leadership. I'm going to model that for my family. I'm going to protect my family from the culture, physically, and I'm going to nurture. I'm going to be a strong leader, but I'm going to understand my child's heart. I'm going to understand my wife's heart. And I mean, those are huge assignments. Kerby, I would say one of the things that we got to be real careful is everything I'm talking about, I can't do.
Right.
Okay? You know, I really can't do. In other words, here's the deal, men listening to me right now, and ladies especially, I'm to love my wife, Teresa, the way Jesus loves the church. It's not a suggestion. It's a command. So I need to lay down my life, sacrifice. I need to be he has a clear intention for the church to conform us to the image of Christ. I need to be the number one fan and the person saying, how do I help Teresa become all God wants her to become? And finally, and then I need to nourish her. And then wives, obviously when a man does that, it's a lot easier to respect, to affirm, to lean in. But I think it's really important that I can't live that kind of life. I need God's power. And I think the reason we're married 40 years is, I think without exception of maybe a few days here and there, my wife and I both know we were so desperate that meeting God regularly and being in His Word and telling Him how desperate we are and talking to Him about our needs and asking for help has been the foundation of our marriage.
Outstanding. Let's take a break, and when we talk a little bit more, we'll get into stepping in as a woman, nurture, protect, provide, and then maybe what about dealing with some of those hard times, all part of this book, Marriage That Works, God's Way of Becoming Spiritual Soulmates, Best Friends, and Passionate Lovers. We'll also talk about some of the great resources available through Living on the Edge. All of it available at our website, by the way, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1997, the Birdville Independent School District welcomed 2 students to their meetings. One student led the Pledge of Allegiance, while the other student delivered a statement of his own choosing, according to the school's policy of allowing student remarks. And that continued for years, most often in the form of an invocation during which the board members stood respectfully quiet with bowed head while the student prayed. That was all well and good until a humanist group sued, alleging the school boards are not legislative bodies and should not be permitted to have an invocation in the same way a state legislature, city council, or county commission does. Eventually, the case arrived before the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where a 3-judge panel upheld the practice, stating, quote, legislative prayers are recited for the benefit of legislative officers. It would be nonsensical to permit legislative prayers but bar the legislative officers for whom they are being primarily recited from participating in the prayers in any way, unquote. The fact that students undertook to lead those invocations was of minimal concern. Quote, although it is possible to imagine a school board student expression practice that offends the Establishment Clause, the court explained, this one, under its specific facts, does not, unquote. This is a routine area of challenge by secularists, but one with limited success, since the long tradition of our country is one of support for prayer at public meetings. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, Chip Ingram with us as we talk about his book, Marriage That Works. And also, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the great resources at Living on the Edge. But we've talked, Chip, about stepping up as a man. Can you speak for just a minute, stepping in as a woman? And there, if nothing else, people might notice that the first chapter for the men is provide, then protect, then nurture. But for women, they're just reversed. Nurture, protect, and provide. Speak to that if you might.
Well, rather than comparing, just like the human bodies, and everyone wants to talk about sex these days, it really is a metaphor for the complement of God needs both male and female, and we have different roles, but they're compatible. And a woman's number one priority in terms of stepping in is to support, affirm, and encourage your husband. And here's the key words: with strength and respect, to lead the family in righteousness. I think this idea that we picked up that marriage is a 50-50 proposition, male or female, it doesn't work. I mean, it's and hundreds of counseling. It's, well, when he starts doing this, then I'll start doing that. Well, when she starts doing that, and I think the woman needs to understand stepping in means I'm going to be 100% on the team when he's responsive and doing what God wants him to, and when he's a little bit less than that. I think, too, that her seeing that her number one priority to step in is to be a champion is the word that I use. It's to empower her husband to fulfill what God made him to do. When you help a man lead well and be a provider and protector, it's amazing what happens when you get nourished. And so I think the practical outworking of that is, I agree with you. I think it's far harder to be a woman in our day, and a Christian, godly woman is a very impossible task apart from great dependency on the Spirit of God. And then we often act as though this isn't. The second priority is the role is mother. It's teacher, counselor, consoler, refugee. I just listened to a famed psychologist out of New York City in a very high-level elite group of people, and, completely secular. And he made this comment. He said, men will abandon families pretty regularly. He said, but women are much more committed parents than men. Regardless of what people want to tell us about there's no difference in the sexes, there is a bond, and there's something happens that a mom and a mother, we act like somehow you can just export that job somehow, some way. Step one, championing the family. Step two, being a mother. And interesting, I think, in what the church has lost, the third priority for a woman stepping in is to nurture younger women, to teach them how to be great wives, great mothers.
Yeah, Titus 2. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost, and again, I think a lot of this goes back to redefining what success is and asking, what do you really want out of life, and what is going to deliver, and get off of the superiority, inferiority, and realize that the greatest satisfaction, and it's different women with different energy levels and different seasons, and some will work, and some will work part-time, and some outside the home, and some will stay home in critical years, and there's all those decisions to make. But I think at first it goes back to say, my first priority is I'm going to be a woman of God. My second is I'm going to step in. The average man, and even the well above average man, cannot be a godly man or husband without a strong, amazing, godly wife. And if you don't make some room for him to lead, I will tell you, the average man, Christian or not, will let you lead. And all the weight and all the responsibility, it'll fall right on you, and he'll keep watching football games and fantasy football and let you make all the decisions and provide and help out and respond just enough when you really, really nag to make short-term changes and default back to the same pattern. I think the challenge for a woman is to trust God that actually a sovereign God in submission is her ally instead of her enemy, and to believe that let some of the weight fall on him, and wisely let a few balls drop and let him feel the weight of those and go, well, honey, that's your job, not mine. And those are challenging things for a woman to do, but men won't pick up the ball if women keep carrying it. And I think they carry it out of great intention and great commitment.
Again, they're concerned about their family, so they're going to do that. But just before we run out of time, I want to talk about what's available on your website, Living on the Edge. I know Marriage That Works, you've got a Marriage That Works bundle, which includes the book and even these truth cards. It won't actually come out till the first week in February, so we're giving people kind of an advance notice. But if somebody wants to use this in their own personal study, or speak for just a minute to our pastors and small group leaders and Bible fellowship leaders and others that might like to teach this in their church or in their Sunday school class, what resources are available or will be coming out there through Living on the Edge?
Well, the goal of the book was not to make people feel guilty and beat up husbands and wives and make them feel overwhelmed. So we have this on video, so you can do it with, some other couples or men with men and women with women and really talk it through. One of the big things Teresa and I did is we were so dysfunctional. We believed a lot of lies. And I came up with these cards that we actually used and reviewed for years.
Yes.
About if I have a struggle and a problem and an argument, it means I probably married the wrong person. Stop, and you flip the card over. Difficulties, struggles, and conflict are a normal part of marriage. They're not deal breakers. They're heart makers. And then I give them a passage. And we reviewed those truths. And so I think anyone who buys the books, we give them those cards for free. And I will tell you, if you start renewing your mind rather than just trying hard, great things happen in your marriage. So we've got small group, the book, and these what we call Marriage That Works truth cards that, I've just been using them for a lot of years. And until my mind changed and I thought differently, my behavior never changed. And that's what we long for. We wanted to develop tools to help people little by little by little. In fact, one of the truth cards was, this is so hard. It seems like no matter how hard we work at our marriage, there's always more stuff to do. I don't think I can keep this up any longer. In other words, I'm ready to quit. Stop. It's a lie. Everything great and of wonderful value, whether it's athletics or music or a great company, requires intense work that's difficult, but the price tag is always worth the final outcome. And then I give them a passage in Hebrews about, for you have need of endurance, so that once you've done the will of God, you'll receive what was promised. Most marriages quit way too early and don't get what God really wants. Most of the problems that 99% of all the people listening, and there are examples, so maybe 90%, there are examples of some super dysfunctional things that need a lot more than any of us can give them. But most of the problems people have that cause divorce are so predictable and so normal, and if they could see it as that and knew what to do, regardless of where they're at, they can actually have a really good marriage.
That is so good. Again, there's hope, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this book today, Marriage That Works. There's videos, there's the truth cards, and all sorts of other things, all available at our good friends at Living on the Edge. And Chip Ingram, it is always great to have you on the program with us.
It is an honor, and the time went really fast, and I sure appreciate the privilege of being on the program.
Chip Ingram, and again, the book is entitled Marriage That Works. And Dr. Nick Pitt's in studio, and I'm looking forward to this next opportunity here to talk with Jonathan Haidt. The book is entitled The Coddling of the American Mind. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. And we've been looking forward to this interview, and that'll be happening right after these important messages.
It will be a fun one, so you'll want to stick around. Here in about 10 minutes, we'll be back.
Be right back.
From Sky Pass Entertainment comes The Least of These, the Graham Stain story. When speculation mounts that a local missionary is converting locals to Christianity in India, a journalist must choose between his own ambition and the truth.
We can't make any mistakes. They have this law for a reason.
I know. We must pray.
Based on the true story. The Least of These, the Graham Stain story. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters February 1st. More information is available at theleastofthese.movie.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
One of the books we tend to quote from quite often is this book that we're going to be talking about right now, The Coddling of the American Mind. Nick Pitts with me, and Dr. Nick Pitts, of course, oftentimes is the host of our Wednesday program where we do a Millennial Roundtable. Today, since it is not that particular day, I'll be the host, but he's going to be sitting right next to me. But Nick, you can remember that lots of times we would quote from this book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Then one day I was at a lecture and somebody quoted from it, and then you mentioned it again the next day in the radio program. I said, we ought to see if we can get Jonathan Haidt on the program. And of course, I'm a TED Talk junkie and have enjoyed some of his material. So again, we've certainly wanted to talk about this book. And I remember when it came out in the Atlantic, it had apparently the title Arguing Towards Misery: How Campuses Teach Cognitive Distortions, but it eventually ended up being The Coddling of the American Mind. And that, of course, is the title of the book that we're going to be talking about today. Jonathan Haidt is, of course, the co-author of this book. We've mentioned him a number of times as well, and a professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. An individual that before that taught at University of Virginia, author of other books that we sometimes have mentioned, The Righteous Mind and the Happiness Hypothesis. And Dr. Jonathan Haidt, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Nick, one of the things that we've oftentimes talked about are the three untruths, and that is, I think, kind of the key to this book, isn't it?
Yeah, Jonathan, I've been a big fan ever since The Happiness Hypothesis, and then just continuing on some of your other work. The Righteous Divide was another great one or Righteous Mind, rather. One of the things I'm really interested in, I think, is help our listeners better understand those three great untruths that you spoke to. And I loved your opening illustration that you utilized in the beginning of the book that I thought was just so poignant and clever.
Oh, yeah. Well, so the whole structure of the book really comes out of my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis. And what that book is I was teaching Psych 101 at the University of Virginia, and I would try to explain psychological principles to my students. And I found myself often quoting Jesus and Buddha and Shakespeare. And I thought, it would be kind of fun to just read the world's wisdom literatures and extract the best ideas and then see if they're true from a psychological point of view with what we know from modern research. And it turns out that there are a few really deep repositories of human wisdom, and the Sermon on the Mount, of course, but the New Testament, the works of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, Buddha, those are some of the richest. And one way to think about this is if you want to know about chemistry and physics, you should spend 0 minutes reading the ancients. I mean, they have nothing to tell us about chemistry and physics. But if you want to understand social life, consciousness, morality, how to get along with people, the religious traditions bring us wisdom that was filtered through so many generations that we only really get the stuff that was useful to people. So anyway, there are 10 chapters in the book, and 3 of them became the basis for The Coddling of the American Mind. It's as though if on campus they read The Happiness Hypothesis and then did exactly the opposite of everything I recommended. So, the 3, I'll just say them and then we can talk about it. But the 3 that really are, bad ideas that are followed on campus are: 1, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. So, make sure you don't have any bad experiences. 2, always trust your feelings. Don't let anyone tell you that the evidence suggests otherwise.
And 3, life is a battle between good people and evil people. And if college students can come to believe those 3, I can almost guarantee they will have relatively unsuccessful and unhappy lives.
Well, let's think through that first one, for example. So, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Like it's a classic spin on. You can either say Nietzsche or you can say Kelly Clarkson. If you're a millennial like myself, you'll quote Kelly. And so, where do you think this is coming? Is this from we're seeing a transition in from the parenting paradigm from having helicopter parents to now having lawnmower parents? What would you say is kind of attributed to this?
Yeah, so the basic psychology here is that human beings are anti-fragile. Mm-hmm. That is, if kids were fragile, then you'd have to protect them so that they don't bang their heads and break. But we're not fragile. We're actually anti-fragile. Kids need to fall down many times in order to learn to walk. They need to burn themselves a couple times in order to learn how to handle fire. We need to use our muscles to strengthen them. It's a very basic principle, clearest for the immune system. If you keep your kids free from bacteria, you're crippling the development of the immune system. So that's the basic developmental psychology. And unfortunately, as societies get wealthier and safer and people live longer and they can sort of assume that, your kids are going to live, for much longer than you, and we become overprotective. And then you add on to that certain new ideas about parenting and child rearing that emphasize compassion. Well, there's a lot of virtues. Kids, it's not healthy to have one virtue carried to extremes. There needs to be some toughness and self-reliance as well as compassion. So for a variety of reasons, I think especially in certain progressive educational circles, there's just too much emphasis on being nice, on stopping fights, on protecting kids from hurt feelings and exclusion. And while it might be well motivated, it ends up having bad effects.
Mm-hmm. And this seems relatively new, right? So it's not simply just a paradigm shift. Like I'm reminded of the Turkish proverb: "He who burns his mouth on hot milk will blow on his yogurt." This isn't just simply the pendulum.
That's great.
The pendulum
Love
shift,
it.
because Ben Sass talks a little bit about this. Senator Sass talks about this in The Vanishing of the American Adult, as well as in his book Them: Why We Hate Each Other. Mm-hmm. What do you think is accounting for just this significant shift that we're seeing among parenting to really not expose their children to the type of harm?
Yeah, I don't see it as a pendulum swing because I don't know of a time when the pendulum swung the other way. Yeah. I think there is kind of a one-way ratchet related to prosperity and safety. So another really important factor here is that birth rates were all, the average family, the typical family generally had more than 2 kids until very recently. And all around the world, when you get wealthier and safer and when women get better educated, a lot of good things happen to society when that happens. But one of them is that birth rates plummet. They generally go below 2 children per woman. And when you have only one child, not only can you, double team him and overprotect him and always be with him, but you have all your eggs in one basket and you're really much more afraid than if you've got 4 kids. You couldn't possibly supervise them all the time. Plus, nowadays, like when I was growing up, there were, there were always other kids in the neighborhood. You come home after school and there'd be somebody you could find. But now there is no kid you could find. I mean, in most of America, if you go out after school, not only will you not find a kid, you'll be arrested. In a lot of towns, if a 9-year-old is found in a park, the parents will be arrested, or at least the, Child Protective Services. So we've grossly overreacted to the very low rates of child abduction, but they were publicized so much in the 80s and 90s that we all freaked out and started locking up our only children.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today. Dr. Jonathan Haidt with us as we talk about the coddling of the American mind. Of course, you can find that book in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to thecoddling.com. And I might just point out that coddling wasn't your first choice, really overprotecting, but that, I think, illustrates exactly that we're overprotecting our children. And a little bit later in the book, I noticed, Nick, it even says that there's a diagram or some material you can give to your kids if you say, I really have let my kids go out like I used to do. There would be days we would say goodbye to our parents in the morning. They wouldn't see us till dinner, and nobody was panicked. But of course, that's changed dramatically. So we've looked at one of those untruths. We've got a lot more to look at. The book is entitled The Coddling of the American Mind. Dr. Jonathan Haidt is one of the co-authors of the book. And if you'd like to know more, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Of course, we have a link to information about the book on our website. And we'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973, who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Stain Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13. In theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Our conversation today is on this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Dr. Nick Pitts with us, of course, and we've been talking about that first bad idea. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. But, Nick, I was also thinking another one. Always trust your feelings.
Yeah, but let me feel something real quickly, especially as the millennial, so the selfie-taking, Uber-riding millennial here on the round table. Jonathan, I'd love to hear, just forecast for us for a second. You have this younger generation that's beginning to have this understanding relative to what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And so this inability to be able to experience, to develop scar tissue, to develop this type of endurance. What are some of the implications for that as this young generation makes its way into the workforce and then into the larger world?
Yeah, the implications are kind of dire for them and for businesses, actually. So first, let me be really, really clear. You millennials are okay.
I've been telling myself that for so long.
We've been trying to tell them that, too.
Of course you have. That's what you millennials say. No, but, look, every generation thinks that the one or two after it are too soft, they're spoiled, entitled, and that goes back to ancient Greece and Rome. They thought that too. And so, any ribbing or teasing between baby boomers, I'm technically a baby boomer born in 1963, but I didn't have any of their main experiences. At any rate, any ribbing between us and millennials is really just like the normal stuff that you guys are a little different.
Yeah.
But millennials take chances. They start businesses. They do all sorts of things. The kids who are in college now and who are teenagers now are not millennials.
Yeah.
They are called Gen Z. This is very important for everyone to understand that kids born in 1995 or 1996, whenever you want to start it, their childhood was really different from kids born in, say, 1992. And the main reason is that you millennials, you got social media when you were in college or later, and it doesn't seem to have done any harm. You mastered it. You have these online lives, but it didn't come in middle school. This is what, now we don't know why depression and anxiety are skyrocketing among teenagers now, but the leading theory, the one that I think the data points to, is that when kids get social media in middle school, they're 11, 12 years old. I mean, it's already the hardest time of life, especially for girls. And then you put iPhones and social media in, and now they're all anxious all the time. They're all doing social comparison all the time, even at night when they're trying to sleep. They're checking their iPhones to see who liked my selfie, and why didn't he like mine if he liked hers? So again, we don't know. The evidence is not conclusive, but what we do know is that rates of depression, anxiety, self-cutting, like cutting yourself to the point where you have to be hospitalized, and suicide are rising for boys a little, but they're rising for girls a lot. The suicide rate for teenage American girls is up 70% in the last 10 years. So this is not just like, hey, they're different from us. This is, wow, Gen Z is really doing badly, and it's not their fault. And, the parents, in a sense that you could say it's the parents and society's fault, but we didn't know. Like, we didn't know that, we thought, electronics, wow, it's stimulating. Maybe it'll make them smarter. Who knows? But now we're beginning to know that the gadgets seem to lead to a kind of addiction and chronic anxiety. Not in most kids, but in a lot. And that's why we think that things are rising. So as they... when this generation entered college in 2013, September 2013, the first ones arrived, that's when all this new stuff hit us. So suddenly in 2014, out of nowhere, we started having students asking for safe spaces, trigger warnings, microaggression training, give us a number to call if a professor says something that we don't like. And we're all like, what? What do you mean you're not safe? What, like in the classroom? What do you mean you're not safe? We couldn't understand it. It took us a couple of years. But now that generation is beginning to graduate. The first ones graduated in 2017, and have just entered the corporate world. And now, whenever I talk to a CEO or anybody who's managing, recent hires from college, they say, "Wow, they're so fragile and easily offended, and I'm spending so much time now handling complaints that somebody heard somebody use a word that they didn't like. It's often over individual words. So we got a problem, and it's spreading."
Yeah, so help me to understand this, and so our listeners as well, because to a certain degree, you have the untruth. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And so there's the desire for safe spaces. There's the desire to be kind of protected from the microaggressions. But then we see certain things that are happening, say, at Middlebury College a few years back, where you have Professor Murray, then you have Professor Strange as well, being physically attacked. So it's almost as though one generation wants to be kept safe, and they have the concept creep that you point out so well in the book of what is safety. But then to the other degree, they're willing to inflict physical pain, it seems, on certain individuals. Help our listeners to be able to understand that.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So as I travel around the country, speaking about the book, what I find is that everywhere I go, no matter whether it's urban or rural, conservative or progressive, whatever it is, everyone says the same thing, that the kids now are very fragile. The soccer coach will say, I mean, if I criticize a kid one day and he won't come back for practice the next. So everyone's noticing the new fragility. What is very variable and is not everywhere is the politicization of it. And so it's only at the really progressive schools. It's only mostly in the Northeast and along the Pacific coast. That's where some students, again, most kids are fine. Most kids are not depressed or anxious. Most kids come to college, they want to learn. But in very politicized schools where there's no political diversity, where almost everybody is on the left, what happens is this fragility is weaponized so that some students will say, hey, if Charles Murray is going to speak here about his new book on social class, well, I'm not going to read that. I don't care about that. He once wrote a book that was offensive on racial grounds. Therefore, if he were to speak about social class here, this will be violence against students of color, or whatever the thinking is. It's a politicization of fragility and weakness. And so that justifies violence because, and interesting, they'll say, as the students there, and especially at UC Berkeley did, they'll say, shutting down a speaker like that with physical force, that's not violence. Because if he's going to be violent with his words, if he's going to use words that we think are violence, Well, it's just self-defense to shut them down. So, and this is true about violence all over the world and throughout history. Large acts of violence are generally motivated, or justified at least, by moral claims that they deserve it or this is self-protection. So it's very dangerous what we're seeing now, that young people, while many of them are fragile themselves, think that therefore justifies them taking extraordinary methods to impose their views or values on others.
And that kind of goes to your third untruth that you kind of identify. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. And so speak to that a little bit, but we'll skip the second one for right now because I think it just beautifully blends in with what you were just sharing.
You're right. It is a perfect transition. So, so I'm a social psychologist, and I study the evolution of human nature, and I'm very interested in how we came to be the creatures that we are, and whether you think that we got this way by God's creation or by evolution, everybody has noticed that we have this tendency to be incredibly judgmental and to jump to conclusions and to damn other people and to not see that we are just as guilty. No one has ever said it better, than judge not that you be not judged. Jesus did not say judge a lot more and don't allow anyone to judge you. I don't think he said that.
Mm-hmm.
Or why do you see the speck that's in your neighbor's eye, but you do not see the log that is in your own?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this tendency to be over-judgmental, and you combine it with our tendency towards tribalism. And what you get is what used to be called Manichaeism, kind of an old Persian religious belief that the world's divided into good people versus evil people, and it's going to be a fight to the death. Now, modern progress in a modern society is, let's find ways to live together despite our differences. Let's not kill each other. Let's find a way that you can believe what you want, I can believe what I want, and we can live together in this grand, gigantic, and diverse country in peace. And we were making a lot of progress with that in the 20th century. And unfortunately, what's happening now is with the new forms of identity politics, many students are learning or being taught to judge people based on their race and gender and other qualities. Students are taught that America is a matrix of oppression. They're taught to see, white people are bad and non-whites are good, and in various ways to make these binary distinctions. And this is exactly the opposite of social progress in my book. So we're seeing, as part of the broader culture war, we have been seeing the left and the right hating each other increasingly. And this is not young people's fault. This has been going on since the 80s and 90s. We do have an increasingly bitter culture war. And on many campuses, that is fueling an increasingly Manichaean or moralistic stance among some students. Again, it's always a minority, but who feel entitled to say, hey, if the conservative group wants to invite somebody here to speak, well, no, we're going to shut it down. No, we don't want their hateful ideas here. So there's a hyper-moralism, which is completely incompatible with expanding thinking, with open-mindedness, with moral humility, basically with what a college education should be.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Dr. Jonathan Haidt with us as we talk about the coddling of the American mind, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. Might mention that, of course, again, you can find this book in your local bookstore. I've ordered it, but in case you cannot, we also have a link there so you can get it in hardcover and Kindle. And Nick, this is a book that we really have recommended so many people read, and that's why we're talking about it today.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to be prevalent and a part of the conversation because he has some great insights that we're going to get to later on during the hour.
Well, we'll take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with Jonathan Haidt and Dr. Nick Pitts right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Jonathan Haidt. The book is entitled The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions Are Bad Ideas, and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. It is a book we certainly do recommend, and if nothing else, Dr. Nick Pitts, we are talking about these issues because they relate so often to the conversations we have around here on the Millennial Roundtable.
Yeah, Jonathan, we were talking about the third untruth. So the first untruth we kind of unpacked during the first part of the segment. We talked about how what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, and just the untruth. And you packed that out, how we create almost like a fragility within children and younger adults. And then we moved over to the third one, which is really interesting, that life is a battle between good people and evil people. And I couldn't help but think about Rousseau when he says that it's impossible to live at peace with those we consider damned. And we're increasingly thinking that the people on the other side, in this hyper-partisan era, have ulterior motives, are very much. What role does politics play in this particular untruth that we find ourselves in?
We are by nature political animals. That is, we're very, very good at forming coalitions to fight other coalitions. This is the way hunter-gatherers live. This is the way tribal groups live. In groups that have transcended it, in large nations, we figure out ways to do it by having sports leagues, and we put on the colors and the clothing and trappings, and we love tribal identities. And it can be great fun on weekends, or it can become such an intense part of your life that you really hate people. You can't learn from them. You can't work with them. That's what we're increasingly seeing. We're seeing people saying that they will not work with someone, let's say, who voted for Trump, or certainly students who voted for Trump find that if they admit that in public, they'll be shamed. So a lot of our worst tendencies really come out or get amplified as any group gears up to hate the other side in this culture war.
So what do you think is accounted for this? I know Andrew Sullivan had a recent piece in the New Yorker that was just a phenomenal piece where he says that certain individuals are now starting to attribute that religion is starting to be replaced by politics. Would you agree with that? Kind of in that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, that is yes. So I think this is the most important psychological insight that I think can help us all understand why it seems like the country is losing its mind, because humans are religious by nature. My book, The Righteous Mind, was about moral psychology, and the third of my three principles there was morality binds and blinds, and I talked about how all over the world human beings lived in small-scale societies where they would worship a tree or a rock or some object. There are traditional ways of worship. We are by nature religious in our thinking. And when large religions came along, like Christianity and Judaism or Hinduism, those in some ways tamed or put everyone on the same page about how to live and how to practice. As those large-scale religions began to fade out in the late 20th century, and by fade out, I just mean in certain progressive secular circles. Obviously, it's debatable, whether they're increasing or decreasing around the world. But many parts of society, certainly where I live, so in universities, until in the early to mid 20th century, there would still be some hints of, say, Christianity or worship or some things on campus. And now one never ever hears a hint or a trace of it, at least at elite schools. And so as Christianity and other religions have faded out, well, our minds didn't change. Our minds didn't lose their religiosity, and new objects of worship take their place. And so at least in progressive secular cultures, that tends to be anti-racism. That is, of course, racism is bad. We all agree with that. But I think you tend to see some social organizations or some cultures that are formed almost as though they're circling around a god, and the god is fighting racism, or sort of the devil is the racist. And of course, again, it's good to do what you can to eliminate racism. But when it becomes a kind of a quasi-religious thing, and this was Andrew Sullivan's point, you have the passion of true believers. You have a blindness to evidence. You have a refusal to see nuance. And basically, this is why a lot of us are kind of walking on eggshells on campus, because anything we say, there are students who will take it in the worst possible way, treat it as blasphemy, and want us punished for it. So there's been a giant loss of trust as there's been a rise of a sort of almost cult-like primitive thinking around politics and especially around sort of identity issues.
So you see, to a certain degree, you're seeing the individuals that aren't participating in, are being religious, but exercising some of those religious tendencies within the political square. You're seeing more of that isolationist perspective and lack of trust, which kind of leads. What role does the loneliness component play in this? I think that's one of the things that I've always been interested in. We're seeing individuals that largely we don't have as many friends that we used to even 25 years ago. Individuals, 51% of Americans don't know their neighbors' names, but we're seeing this rise of the average American has 338 Facebook friends, but there's not a robustness and richness to those Facebook friends that you have in reality. So what role does kind of the loneliness play in this?
That's right. I think it plays a very big role. No man is an island. We are by nature deeply social creatures, ultra social creatures. If you imagine bees have evolved to live in a hive, and if one day you sort of came along and said, okay, let's break up all the hives. It's terrible to force bees to live in hives. Bees should be free, and you make all bees live an independent life. I mean, they would not thrive. They would not do well in that circumstance. And in some ways, modernity has done that to human beings. We evolved. We are by nature. We love to have deep human connections, networks of connections, and face-to-face, real friendship connections. Virtual connections, I think, don't suffice. And I think what we're seeing is the weakening of real human connections, and at the same time, the loss of an overarching moral framework. This is a related fact. In my book, The Righteous Mind, I talk about morality as being like a matrix, like the movie The Matrix, a consensual hallucination. We need an overarching moral framework, and in America in the 20th century, it was a generally Protestant framework. And I think as that has thinned out or collapsed, it's been a bit like bees that have the hive ripped away from them. And I say this as a Jew. I'm Jewish. My grandparents came to this country. There was a little bit of anti-Semitism, but not much compared to the rest of the world. My parents assimilated. They aspired to live in a sort of a WASP-like way. My wife is Korean American. Her parents came to this country in the 50s, 60s, and again aspired to assimilate into American culture. And Jews and Koreans have been amazingly successful in this country because there was a kind of a coherent, dominant moral framework that allowed people to get ahead through hard work. And as that overarching framework has either faded away or been shredded in some parts, I think what we're left with is a kind of a moral chaos. And in that chaos, some fairly toxic patterns that are like religion can emerge, and that's again was Andrew Sullivan's point that this sort of wokeness religion has some features to it. Again, it's great to be against racism. It's great to push for rights for everyone, but it has some features that I think make it very intolerant.
Would you go so far as to so one of the classic works that's continually attributed is Alistair McIntyre's After Virtue. He has that opening parable in the book where it talks about just this individuals that are largely living in this decimated land where there is no moral framework. We don't know what things mean. We don't have some of those terms that we utilize to be able to distinguish right from wrong. Would you go so far as to say that that's kind of the moral morass that we're in right now?
Yes, I would. I read that book when I was a postdoc back in around the early 90s, and it's been on my list to read it again because, yes, I think McIntyre's diagnosis that he made was it late 70s or early 80s that he wrote that book. I think was correct. Of course, the 70s felt like a time of great anomie. Late 60s and 70s felt like a time, and so he's writing at the end of that wave of it. I do think he's right. I think that this is, I wish I was a sociologist. I love sociology, but I think we have some real sociological problems in this country, and it is creating an environment in which it is harder to thrive. And yes, as you say, the loneliness, the separation is just really bad for people.
Yeah, Kerby, so I know McIntyre was the one that, Rod Dreyer was the one that utilized that for his book, the Benedict option, in which kind of not necessarily the withdrawal from society, but the strengthening of ties, especially among evangelicals, to be able to pass on some type of orthodoxy. And so just really interesting to see how all of these things are connected. And specifically, I'm really interested in that high idea of just, we'll get to in the next segment of this idea of not trusting or always trust your feelings, this great untruth that Jonathan so well explained.
We'll get to that. Also in that chapter on witch hunts, he talks about the fact that there are some characteristics, they arise quickly, crimes against the collective. as well as charges are often trivial and fabricated. But he added one more that you and I've talked about before, the fear of defending the accused. We keep waiting for somebody to say, wait a minute, that's just over the top. Wait a minute, that's not right. But again, that's something else you've added. And just one of the many insights I got from the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. So let's take a break. We'll come back and, again, some great insight into this book in so many different ways. Let me commend to you his previous books. We've mentioned them many times, but again, The Happiness Hypothesis and The Righteous Mind. And, of course, this one, The Coddling of the American Mind. Nick Pitt's with me. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1997, the Birdville Independent School District welcomed 2 students to their meetings. One student led the Pledge of Allegiance, while the other student delivered a statement of his own choosing, according to the school's policy of allowing student remarks. And that continued for years, most often in the form of an invocation during which the board members stood respectfully quiet with bowed head while the student prayed. That was all well and good until a humanist group sued, alleging the school boards are not legislative bodies and should not be permitted to have an invocation in the same way a state legislature, city council, or county commission does. Eventually, the case arrived before the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where a 3-judge panel upheld the practice, stating, quote, legislative prayers are recited for the benefit of legislative officers. It would be nonsensical to permit legislative prayers but bar the legislative officers for whom they are being primarily recited from participating in the prayers in any way, unquote. The fact that students undertook to lead those invocations was of minimal concern. Quote, although it is possible to imagine a school board student expression practice that offends the Establishment Clause, the court explained, this one, under its specific facts, does not, unquote. This is a routine area of challenge by secularists, but one with limited success, since the long tradition of our country is one of support for prayer at public meetings. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, Jonathan Haidt with us as we're talking about his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Nick, we only have a few minutes left with him, but there's some great material in this book, 300 pages. Can't possibly cover all of it in 1 hour, but I think we've done a good job of giving people an overview.
Yeah, and unfortunately we can't. So for our listeners, we've gone through the book's kind of centered on 3 great untruths, and we've talked about the first one, and we've talked about the last one. First one being what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Life is a battle between good and evil people. And then the second one that I want to spend the rest of our segment talking about, Jonathan, is always trust your feelings. Share with our listeners a little bit about that, because I don't know about you, but I've always been told I can't fight this feeling anymore, and so help us to understand
Good
that.
song, but maybe bad theology.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's right. I wouldn't run my life based on pop music wisdom. The origin of the book is that my friend and co-author Greg Lukianoff is prone to depression, and he had a terrible depression in 2007, and he made very specific plans to kill himself.
Wow.
And at the last moment, he called 911 and broke down crying, and they coaxed him they sent an ambulance. They sent him to a hospital. When he got out, he learned he was treated by a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and he learned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the most effective form of treatment out there for anxiety and depression, effective because it's so easy to learn. Anyone can learn it quickly. And in CBT, you learn to recognize all the distorted thinking that your mind does, and that depressed and anxious people do a lot more. So catastrophizing, black and white thinking, discounting the positive. Oh, nothing's good in my life, and someone tells you something that's good, and you say, well, that doesn't count. And so there are certain ways that people think when they are depressed and anxious, and Greg learned to master that and to question his feelings and to look for evidence. And when you do that, you actually get better. And so he goes back to his job at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, arguing for free speech rights for college students. And then suddenly in 2013, 2014, as we were talking about before, suddenly he found students saying, shut that down. Don't let this person on campus protect me from this word or this book. And they were justifying it with catastrophizing and black and white thinking. And Greg was thinking, how did they learn to think this way? What kind of college would teach kids to do the very distortions that I learned to stop doing? And so that's why Greg reached out to me as a psychologist to develop this idea with him. And that's what became our Atlantic article with that title. Mm-hmm. In 2015. And it was only after our article came out, it was really just a few months later, that all hell broke loose on campuses with protests over Halloween costumes in late 2015. So the problem's been getting worse and worse. And part of what we're seeing is that on university campuses, which are supposed to be teaching critical thinking, there's certain ideas about, say, one's lived experience cannot be questioned. So if someone says, well, my lived experience is that this is a matrix of oppression, you have to say, oh, yeah, okay, you're right. You can't look for counter evidence. And in all manner of ways, if everyone's empowered to believe their feelings, and there's no way that we can reach truth together because your truth conflicts with my truth, and we don't have a procedure for working out who's right. So this is just part of the decay of a shared moral matrix, a shared community of meaning, if people are empowered to believe their feelings and defend them.
Yeah, and so I hear that, and so I think there's, especially in conservative circles, there's kind of the opposite of that to a certain degree. So you hear individuals like Ben Shapiro that says facts don't care about your feelings, and so it's almost a complete discounting of feelings. But that's not what you're saying, is it? You're arguing that just to question your feelings, which is it's different than just completely discounting them.
No, that's right. In fact, my book, The Righteous Mind, and my own research is on how all of us are driven by intuitions. We're not as rational as we think. But here's the trick. Each of us individually does confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. Each of us individually is a master of post hoc reasoning. And the only cure for it, the only way that psychologists have ever found to overcome that, is to put us together with other people who have a different starting bias, and they find the evidence against us that we cannot find. Mm-hmm. And that's why a jury is so wonderful, because you have people who will challenge each other and see it differently. And that's why university is so wonderful, because, I, as a scientist, I come up with my theory, and I'm not trying to disprove it. I'm trying to prove it. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, there are other people out there who will try to disprove it. Now, I've been on a campaign that we need more political diversity in a lot of the social sciences, because if everyone starts from one side, then that normal disconfirmation process begins to break down. So I think that the loss of political diversity at least amplifies or continues the trend of allowing people to trust their feelings. I think it is true that conservatives tend to believe more in tough love and not being so sensitive about people's feelings. Right now, I think we could use more of that in a lot of our, certainly in our universities.
And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about The Righteous Mind. And if you wouldn't mind, spell this out a little bit for us, because in The Righteous Mind, I mean, you utilize the kind of the imagery of an elephant and someone sitting atop an elephant, and you kind of call to mind David Hume's idea that our reason is but a slave to our desires. And then, especially from a Christian standpoint, then you can point back to Augustine, and Augustine talking about the weight of our love carrying us. And I think one of the great lines that you use in The Righteous Mind that I'd love for you to be able to tease out that you touched on is this idea that we kind of back into our moral reasoning to a certain degree. We're not nearly as logical, because if we were as logical, then it would take us forever to be able to reach any type of conclusion.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, my view is that we are primates who evolved from earlier primates, and then we have this amazing new innovation, which is language and the ability to think logically. But the brain didn't suddenly rewire itself and say, okay, language, reasoning, you're in charge now. No, not at all. We're still these passionate, emotional, intuitive creatures. And so the metaphor that I came up with it goes back to the happiness hypothesis. The first chapter of that book is on the divided self, because wise people in every culture that left us stories, I should say, has realized that part of being human is to be divided against yourself. In fact, here's the opening quotation. I forgot this. Here's the opening quotation of chapter 1 of the happiness hypothesis. For what the flesh desires is opposed to the spirit, and what the spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to prevent you from doing what you want. So I go into the psychology of that, and the metaphor that I use to explain that psychological insight is that the mind is divided into parts that sometimes conflict, like a small rider, which is reasoning, sitting on top of a very large elephant, which is intuition and emotion. And many societies have seen people as being like a rider on a horse. But I wanted an animal that was really, really big and smart, and so an elephant was a better metaphor. But yeah, that explains why we end up doing so many stupid things. But if you put us in community with other people who can check us and raise questions and raise concerns, then we end up being a lot smarter. And I think that's what a good community is. That's what a good religious community is. That's what a good community of practice is.
And Nick, one of the things we've talked about is reading widely, considering different viewpoints, and the conversation we have here so often here on Point of View.
Yeah, I completely agree. It goes back to Walter Lippmann. I'm reminded Walter Lippmann has that quote in 1922. He says that all too often we define then investigate, when in reality we should investigate then define.
Yes. Well, Jonathan Haidt, I appreciate you giving us some time. It has been a very fast hour. We appreciate the book. We quote it so often. It was nice to have you here, hearing your comments on it. And thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, well, thank you so much. If I could just put in one last word for those with young children, please go to letgrow.org. You'll find a lot of suggestions for helping your kids grow up stronger and helping your schools raise stronger kids, too. It's a pleasure talking with you, gentlemen, and best wishes to you all and your listeners.
I just mentioned some of that information is also in the book if you get a copy of it, and we do have a link to it at pointofview.net. Nick, just a great interview.
Oh my goodness, yeah. He's a treasure to the U.S. and to the greater global community as well. Just some great insights that will be helpful as we try to navigate our way through this world.
He looks at it from an evolutionary point of view. Obviously, I look at it from a creationist point of view, but his insights are very helpful and maybe help us understand some of the conversation we normally have around this round table. That's all we have for today. I hope that you appreciated the conversation we've had over the last couple of hours. I want to thank Doug for his help, as well as Steve. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is